Aria was going through a divorce when she met Lucas. Her ex-husband, Samuel, left her for a younger coworker. Their daughter, Ella, chose to stay with her mom. In the midst of the divorce proceedings, Aria met Lucas by chance at a coffee shop. She was sitting with a stack of papers related to obtaining a dissolution of marriage certificate. Lucas struck up a conversation and offered to get to know her. Exhausted by recent events, Aria couldn't refuse his friendly gesture. Lucas turned out to be a pleasant and fun guy. When it was time to part ways, Aria mustered up the courage to ask him for his phone number. She immediately shared the news with her friend, who did not approve of her act. The friend voiced concerns that Lucas might turn out to be a stranger or worse, a maniac. Aria replied that all men are strangers, but life must go on, and she didn't want to be alone. Aria and Lucas began dating. He asked her out on dates, always brought her flowers, and courted her lavishly. One day, Lucas surprised her by inviting her on an all-expense-paid trip to the sea. All she had to do was ask for time off work and agree to go. She enjoyed Lucas's attention and appreciated his care, as her previous husband had been rather stingy in this regard. While on vacation at the sea, Lucas proposed to her, as they sat on the beach together, watching the sunset and enjoying a glass of chilled wine. Lucas gave Aria a small box with the words, "Aria, I want to spend the rest of my life watching sunsets with you." Touched by his sincere gesture, she cried and accepted his offer. Wasting no time, they started preparing for the wedding as soon as they got home. A friend, to whom Aria had previously told about Lucas, inquired about how it had gone. Lucas informed Aria that he had saved up enough money for the wedding that he would allow them to have a lavish celebration. Aria couldn't believe her happiness. Her first wedding had been simple, even without a white dress, because she and Samuel had gotten married right out of college when they were poor but deeply in love. Sometimes she even cried with happiness, realizing that everything that was happening now was happening for her. Everything was falling into place. Aria's friend, Stella, brought up the subject of children. "Have you talked about having more children?" she asked. Aria calmly replied, "We decided that Ella was enough for us." Her friend asked further, "Doesn't Lucas want to have a child of his own? After all, Ella has someone else's blood." This infuriated Aria. Lucas had never treated Ella differently. He had always been a loving father to her, taking her to coffee shops and ice cream shops and movies, picking her up from school, and taking her to activities. They have come to the conclusion that they only want one child. When Ella got older, they planned to go traveling, and having a young child would make that difficult. Plus, Aria was already 35 years old and didn't want to go through the hassle of pregnancy and infancy again. The wedding was a grand success. There were many guests, the tables were filled with delicious food, and champagne flowed. The next morning, Lucas was preparing breakfast. Aria woke up, walked into the kitchen, and lovingly hugged her husband from behind. Lucas smiled and asked, "How was your first night as my wife?" Aria laughed and replied, "Well, I was expecting some kind of miraculous transformation, but everything stayed the same." As the years passed, Aria and Lucas continued to have a strong relationship. Their family was filled with love and warmth. During dinner, Lucas turned to his wife and said, "Honey, come with me to visit my parents. They need our help." Lucas's parents lived in a small village 30 kilometers from the city. As a loving son, he often visited them either for vacation or at his mother's request. Aria gladly accompanied him on these trips, enjoying their conversations along the way. One morning, after a hearty breakfast, they set off, leaving their daughter with Aria's mother along the way. Despite the rainy weather, the highway was clear, allowing Lucas a quick drive to his parents' home. During the ride, the couple talked about what they had been up to lately. Aria talked about her new job, which she had started 4 months ago, and shared anecdotes about coworkers and bosses. Just as she mentioned the new project they were working on, an unforeseen event occurred. Her husband lost control of the car, causing it to flip over and fall into a ditch. Aria, hitting her head during the accident, lost consciousness. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Lucas, suffering from an apparent chest fracture and nosebleed, attempted to call for an ambulance, but noticed people rushing towards them from the side of the road. Confident that help was arriving, the couple waited for it. At the hospital, Lucas received the necessary medical attention for his injuries, particularly a cut on his hand from shards of glass during the accident. In addition, Aria underwent emergency surgery due to internal bleeding. While Lucas was resting under medication in his room, a doctor came in to give him an update. Several hours had passed since Aria had been taken to the operating room, and the doctor informed Lucas that despite successful intervention to stop the bleeding, the pregnancy could not be saved. The news left Lucas in shock and disbelief. "I apologize for the confusion." When Lucas asked the doctor about the delivery date, the doctor explained that at this stage of the pregnancy, it was difficult to determine an exact date, but it could be around 12 to 14 weeks. Lucas looked skeptical and asked if the doctor had checked him thoroughly. He shared that he thought he couldn't have children and had consulted a doctor when he was 20 years old. In panic, they looked at each other, both realizing where this was going. The next morning, Lucas was allowed to visit his wife in the hospital. He was shocked by her appearance. There were bruises on her body and clear IV tubes attached to her body. Even though the doctor told him this, Lucas decided not to share this information with his wife. They talked briefly, and then Lucas left Aria to rest. He was overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. A week later, Lucas sat by Aria's bedside and told her about the latest news. They would have to buy a new car because the old one was beyond repair. Aria listened, and a faint smile appeared on her face. Suddenly, she grabbed Lucas' hand and looked him seriously in the eye. She admitted that she had something to confess. She'd been holding it in as punishment. She had cheated and betrayed him. Lucas nodded, realizing what kind of punishment she meant. He already knew everything from day one, and yet he couldn't explain to himself why he was still there, harboring resentment for Aria's actions. To complicate things further, Aria revealed that she had met the man at work, and they had been together for a while. However, she stopped their meetings after only 3 times. Unfortunately, by then it was too late. She was already pregnant. Aria was faced with the difficult choice of breaking up with her husband or letting go of her unborn child. She was torn and hoped it would resolve itself without having to make a decision. She confided in coworkers who knew about her affair and immediately shared the news of her pregnancy. She struggled to find the words to gently explain it to Lucas, but she knew it would soon become clear without words. Lucas listened to all of this in silence. He informed her that he would support her until she was fully recovered and released from the hospital. But after that, they would file for divorce, and he followed through with his decision. It wasn't easy for Lucas to break the routine, as he had grown attached to both Aria and her daughter. However, there was no alternative, and they had to go their separate ways. Lucas tried to put his ex-wife out of his mind. The only time he had heard from her was when mutual acquaintances mentioned that Aria had quit her old job and moved to another city. As for himself, Lucas was determined to never marry again. He loved Aria, but she had betrayed him, and he wasn't ready to open up to someone new. Love allowed him to forgive a lot of things, but when she was gone, everything became meaningless.